In this final part of Crystalyn's story, we're picking up right where we left off, the moment everything snapped into place for her. Part 4 is where the picture finally comes together. Not just how she woke up, but how that clarity helped her family wake up too. Let's bring it home.
What happened in your life that just had you just get out of there and never go back?
So it started actually about 5 or 6 years before I actually left. And what happened is it was around the early 2000s where they started changing the way they talked about like the generation of 1914. Because when I was young, they always said that was the generation that wouldn't pass away, that they would, if we knew that the end was coming as their numbers dwindled. That was how it was when I was young. Well, now, we're at around 2000, late 90s, and most of those people have already passed away. Most of the people of that generation were gone. And the number of partakers was not declining. And I thought that was very odd, because how is it almost, at that time, 80 years later, and you still have 9,000 partakers?
Mhm.
Like, how is that possible? So that was one thing. Another thing was they came out with this book. I don't remember the full title, but it was called Proclaimers. And in that book, they were given like the history of the organization in the first part of that book. And that actually had the reverse effect on me. It made me start questioning the organization, because I didn't understand how things were so different, how things had changed so much, and how in the book, the people who supported Russell, who was the first president of the organization, when he died, all of a sudden they were in the wrong. The people who believed that, things should be run the way he was running things, they were considered wrong. And they were the ones that were kicked out of Bethel. And they were the ones, because you had to support Rutherford. So I took that as a corporate takeover kind of situation, like out with the old, in with the new. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about that, because you can only say so much to people before people start saying you're straying from the teachings, or you're asking too many questions, or, they start wondering. So I would like gently talk to people about some of the things that I didn't understand in the book, or I wondered about, and people would say, "Oh, well, we had new light," or "It was just different times," or, no one would really talk about the fact that there were some major doctrinal changes that had happened, and the people who were for the former doctrine were considered bad, and there was whole new arrangement was ushered in. And also there were a lot of prophecies that were made that didn't come true back then. And they were just kind of like brushed off a little bit. And that made me want to really know. I didn't feel like that book was telling the whole story. And it made me want to research outside of organizations' publications about that time period. What was going on at that time period of the First World War, generally, that would make people turn against Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, they weren't even Jehovah's Witnesses then, but Bible students or whatever. And I just became curious, but there was no one I could talk to about it, because that was I was afraid it would be seen as me questioning the organization. And then as they're coming out with more new light, as they call it, in referencing the generation of 1914, that did not sit well with me. I felt like that was a fundamental, foundational doctrine that was being changed, and no one was asking questions. Everyone, it was just new light, and we were just supposed to forget about the past. But I felt like there needs to be more discussion about this, because this is a change of our foundation Our fundamental teachings are changing. And I thought there should be more discussion about that. And there was very little. Everyone was just like, oh, we've got new light. Oh, that's it. Oh, that's great. And for me, that wasn't great. I wanted to talk about it. We need to have a little discussion about all these changes, because this was my foundation that I got baptized on. And this teaching that you had for 70 years is now changed. Why would God allow something to be taught for 70 years and said that the whole rest of the world is wrong if they don't believe this teaching for 70 years, and then change it and then say, nope, now it's this other thing. Now that doesn't matter at all. And I had a problem with that. And it made me go outside of the publications to start looking for answers as to what was really going on at that time period of these teachings. And I found out a lot of things by reading, probably things that I wasn't supposed to be reading, literature that they said you shouldn't read from apostates. But I found out a lot of things. So I was already, in my mind, my foundation was crushed. It was over. Now it was just a matter of, how do I get out of this without causing too many waves? Because my parents were still witnesses. All of my friends were witnesses. A lot of my friends were elders and regular pioneers, circuit overseers, Bethelites. Like those were my friends. How do I leave and I will have no friends? My family might not talk to me. At that time, I wasn't sure how my parents would feel about this. So I stayed a few more years. And so then when I finally decided that I had had enough, I couldn't sit there anymore. I remember it was a Sunday meeting. I remember the talk. I remember what was said, where my mind finally said that I can't sit here anymore. I can't be here anymore. And I knew that was going to be my last meeting. And I was ready, because I had gone to massage school. I'd already started making friends outside of the organization. And that was another thing too. When I finally wasn't so busy pioneering and doing things in the organization, and I started really getting into conversations and building relationships with people outside of the organization, I realized that things that they were saying about people on the outside wasn't true. Many people read their Bibles. Many people had a very good understanding of their Bible. Many people were faithful. They had morals, right? They were raising their children to have morals. And so I started to say, well, what they said is not true. You don't have to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses to have morals or to live by Bible standards, or any of these people are perfectly fine people living perfectly fine lives, being respectful of others and being supportive of me. And they were not Jehovah's Witnesses. And so since I was starting to develop relationships and friendships outside, I didn't feel as nervous about losing those relationships inside. So a lot of times I would say to people, if you have interests, start developing those interests, start getting to know people on the outside, because it opened my eyes to the fact that they weren't telling the truth even about that, even about people who were not Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. And I think it's good that you were, finding that new clientele of friends. I think that's what JT's mother, she kind of said that to us. She said, when you leave the religion, you got to get a new clientele of friends, because you're going to lose the ones that you already have,
And I lost everybody, all of them. And yeah,
How did you feel?
I think it hit me one time. I was with some of my new friends who were not, Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was at a friend's house, and some of her friends that she had been friends with since childhood were there, and they were just reminiscing about when they were kids and, what the crazy stuff they got into and different things. And I stopped and I was like, all of my friends that knew me when I was young, none of them speak to me anymore. So the only friends that I had were new friends. I didn't have any old friends. And that really hit me. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. And that affected me for a while. Like, I really lost all my friends. Like, nobody talks to me.
Well, tell me
Like, I,
when I was telling this experience a long time ago about how when we left the religion, it's almost like everybody was on a cruise ship and they died and you were the only survivor. That's what it's like. You lost everybody, you know.
yeah. But for a time at first, I felt like I was in this little limbo period also because like I didn't have my old friends, but I was still nervous about new people was meeting because, they were doing things that before I thought was considered bad,
Mhm.
smoking cigarettes and partying and just doing, different things. And so for a while I was in this like middle ground where I didn't want to get too close to my new friends either
Mhm.
because they were doing things that I didn't approve of, but then I had none of my old friends. They all thought I was bad. So that was a strange place to be in also. Learning that you don't have to 100% agree with someone to be their friend. I cannot I cannot agree with smoking cigarettes, but I could choose to be friends with someone who does smoke cigarettes. I could choose not to drink alcohol, but I can be friends with someone who does drink alcohol. Like, you don't have to 100% have the exact same beliefs as someone in order to be their friend. But in the organization, you did. You all had to be in agreement about certain things in order to be considered a friend. And so then I realized, oh, that's not true. These people are supportive of me. They're supportive of my new career. They're helping me. They're supporting me. And yeah, maybe they do things that I don't necessarily want to do myself, but that doesn't mean I can't be friends with them.
Mhm.
And so once I realized that, that also opened me up to new experiences, trying things, going places. It kind of broke me from the whole holding on to certain lifestyle things that from when I was in the organization. So even though I didn't believe the doctrine, I think I was still holding on to some lifestyle choices based on the doctrine.
Yeah, because it's baked in. A lot of times
Yeah,
people don't realize that they're still carrying on, not realizing because it's just what you were. That's just part of who you are.
right.
You know.
That was what it was. And I realized that some of the things, like I told you, I was a modest dresser. And then when I wasn't a Jehovah's Witness anymore, I was still a modest dresser. That was part of just my personality. I did wear different kind of clothes and, wear more fashionable styles, but I never, went, real dramatic changes. I've
Mhm.
always been the same. And never was a big drinker, still am not, never became a big drinker, so there was certain things that I was perfectly fine with and comfortable with, that was part of my personality. Now, was it just because of my upbringing as Jehovah's Witness, or was this how I would have ended up being even if I had never been a Jehovah's Witness? I don't know,
It
but
was
it was comfortable for me.
it was probably the Jehovah's Witness because, I remember when Black women used to say when they first started saying girlfriend, girlfriend, you know, and I remember being at work and there was these two Black women. One was named Audrey and the other one's name was Joyce. And Joyce could say girlfriend. She said, girlfriend, let me tell you. And I remember like knowing that we couldn't say that. That would just be unacceptable to be at the Kingdom Hall talking about some girlfriend. Let me tell you what's going on over here. So you knew you couldn't say that, but it was just like
Yeah.
little slang that people would be saying, like stuff like that you knew you couldn't say. And after we left the religion, it was like, wow, something as simple as just saying girlfriend.
Right.
But it was the connotation that it carried. The reason why you couldn't say it because that was a slang word that you're not supposed to be saying that. So
Yeah.
it's all ingrained in you, all ingrained.
Yeah. So yeah, but I was perfectly comfortable with that. But I was also comfortable with allowing people to be who they were.
Mm-hmm.
They can say what they want to say and do what they want to do, and I could still be their friend,
Mm-hmm.
even though I didn't do those things, even though I didn't talk a certain way. You know, they're I can be around them. They can talk how they want to talk and do what they want to do. And that was what I was started to learn when I left, that you don't have to 100% agree with somebody to be their friend.
Right.
And because there were a lot of, at the time in Texas, it's kind of the Bible Belt, so there were a lot of religious people there, and I was not religious anymore at all. I was not going to change to another religion after leaving. At first I kind of dabbled a little bit thinking that I might, but I didn't. But I could still be friends with people who did, who had their own religious beliefs. I could still be friends with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was learned after I left, because when we were in, we were told, no, you're not supposed to be friends with the world and other religions, everybody's wrong. And so after I left is when I realized there is a way to develop new friendships and new relationships, and one of the ways is to not judge people so harshly just because they think different than you think about certain things, or because they do activities that you don't want to do for yourself. That doesn't always have to be a deal breaker
Mm-hmm.
when making friends.
Where did you find most of your friends from?
So at first, most of my friends were from massage school, from work, because when I went to massage school, the whole like kind of holistic profession, it was a whole culture and a whole community. So I had friends who were acupuncturists that I had met at conferences, and so it was a whole new community of people. So a lot of people were people that I worked with, or people that I had went to massage school with, or people that I had met at different conferences or things that I went to. So those were mainly my first friends when I left. And it was a good place to be for me, because they were into like clean living, a lot of them, and they were spiritual. So they believed in positivity. So it was a good place for me after I left, because it was comfortable. Because even though people weren't talking about religion, they were still talking about self-improvement, and they were talking about spirituality and things along those lines. So it was very comfortable for me to have those conversations and to be a part of that community. And so for me personally, that was a benefit when I left, that I found that I just happened to right after leaving, find a community that I fit in,
And
like right away.
I bet you any amount of money those elders' wives that were going to that support group, they could have probably dealt with. They would have probably loved being in company with those people.
Yeah, I think they would have. And also getting support from women, like I was saying earlier, being able to talk freely about things that I used to have to keep a secret, things about myself that I didn't want people to know because I thought I would be judged harshly. Um, you have an image, when you're a Jehovah's Witness. My image was the faithful single pioneer that made the sacrifice. That was my image. And so certain things that I had other interests in, I didn't want anybody to know because I would be judged. It didn't fit my image, you know? So then when I left, I realized I can just say whatever I want to say. I can talk about what I want to talk about. I can read books about things that I never read before, and then actually tell somebody, I read this crazy book. I don't have to keep it a secret and say, oh, I can't tell anybody I read this book. You know, I don't want anybody to find out. That's how it was when I was Jehovah's Witness. I can't tell anybody that I'm reading this book about, spirituality or something. I can't tell anybody. But then when I was out, I was like, oh, I can read whatever I want, and I can talk to my friends openly about it, and I can change my opinion about things. And it worked for me. That community was a help to me after I left.
That is excellent. I mean, you have a great story, a lot of good experiences to share. And I just want to find out about your mother and father. How long did it take you to wake them up?
So I think the first person was my mother. And my sister, I have a younger sister who had already left the organization, and she lived out of state at the time. And so my mom and I, we were always very close, even from when I was a child. We were very close. And I think after my sister and I both were gone, and she saw that we were having success in our lives outside the organization, she was fine with that. And it since she didn't stop talking to me, it left me opportunities to have discussions with her. She was going through her own struggles, and with some of the things like you were saying, being judged by things. Why weren't you at the meeting? What's wrong? Just always questioned about your whereabouts if you were not at the Kingdom Hall. And she had expressed to me that was kind of bothering her. And I was able to share things with her slowly. And so she was the first one that started doing her own research about things, not even necessarily just doctrinal things with my mom. I started researching a lot about abuse cases of child abuse, and also domestic violence that was kind of shut down and kept quiet in the organization. And I wanted to share that with my mom, but I knew I had to be careful how I did that so she wouldn't think it was like apostate information. So what I would do is, if I was on a certain website or listen to a podcast of an ex-Jehovah's Witness, I wouldn't share that with her. I would go, whatever reference they made, I'd go find it, like a news story, an actual news story. And then I would show that video to her and say, look at this on the news, this case that's going on, or, I would do that. So that way she couldn't say that I was showing her anything from apostates. This was from Channel 10 News. And or some psychologist or somebody else. And that's what I started to show her. And I did a lot of research to be able to do that. I would comb through YouTube and find like news clippings of stuff. If someone said something happened in Chicago, I would look for a news report about it in the newspaper, or a video of a newscast. And that is what I would show my mom. And so that would pique her interest. And she would say, they don't tell us this. I had no idea. And she would ask my father, who was the elder, did you know about this? Did you know this was going on? Did you know that these court cases were going on? And he would say, no, I didn't know. And then that was it. She was doing her own research. She was finding stuff I didn't even know about. And so it was after I started talking to her and showing her certain things, she just took off with it on her own. Yeah. So for her, I think it was about 3 years after I left, maybe 4.
Okay. I
Yeah.
just remember your mother when she called me the first time we talked. I don't remember all the details, but she and I talked, and she goes, my daughter is the one that told me about this,
Oh,
Yeah, that
yeah.
was great.
And I would show her things. And, the one thing that happened that I don't know, that was spontaneous, that I had no idea, was, that was back when they started having the sex offender registry, where and they had a website that you could put your zip code in, and it would tell you all the registered sex offenders in your area. And so I had found that out, and I told my mom about it. I said, did you know there was a website that you could do this? And she was like, no. And I said, well, let me show it to you. And we put her zip code in, and we were just looking through and saying like, wow, there's, lots of people in the area, whatever, you're just having a conversation about it. And a brother from the Kingdom Hall popped up. And I didn't know.
Oh,
Yeah. On the sex offender registry, somebody from her Kingdom Hall. And nobody in the Kingdom Hall, because like everything's confidential in
yeah,
the judicial meeting, so they don't divulge.
right.
And I think that was actually like the last straw.
But you know what? I'm gonna tell you something, and See, you're just having a casual conversation. You're looking for articles that don't come from apostates, and you're friends with your mom. Now you see why they don't want you talking to
Yes.
people that leave, because you're just having friendly conversation, friendly fire, as it were.
Yeah, we would just be talking, and I would say, oh my good. And the funny thing about it is I've never talked to her about this really, but I wonder if she wondered where all of a sudden I would find this stuff. I had to have been getting the idea from somewhere, but she never said anything if she suspected. But yeah, I would only show her like things from newspapers or newscast or somebody who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness who was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would show her those things. I never would say, go to this ex Jehovah's Witness website. I never did that. And some of the things I feel like she should have been suspicious about, because I was finding out that there were changes in the literature, and I would look it up, and then I would say, they changed this, in the magazine. And she would be like, what are you talking about? And I would show her, so she had to know I was getting that from somewhere.
I think the issue that you're having is your mother and daughter, and you're close. And if you were having any other issues, mother and daughter, that wasn't close, or she would have thought that you weren't spiritual or whatever, she would have probably shut it down a long time ago. You probably didn't change up too much in what you were doing, because you
No,
still the same person that you were when you left. So she doesn't have reason to take pause.
I think you're probably right.
If you had dyed your hair pink and got some nose piercings, maybe that would have been a different story. I don't
I
know.
never thought about it, but you're right. I was pretty much the same. I'm pretty much the same now as I've always been.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I never went through a real rebellious phase. So I think you're right. I was
Mm-hmm.
just always the same. I think for my dad too, because he was an elder at the time, I think he had a little bit of an issue with it when I left, but he never did completely stop talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I approached my mother with things that I was learning about the organization. I never approached him. She would, though. She would have conversations with him about different things after she left. But I really didn't, because I just felt like with her, I knew I had an in. I knew the things that she had issues with already with the organization, you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So I could kind of attack those things. But with him, he was just had been an elder for so many decades, and I just really didn't push too hard with that.
Yeah.
But he finally did leave also, and but his situation was something that happened to him on his own. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really anything that I said necessarily. I think the only thing with him was that he saw, like you said, that I didn't change very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that made it comfortable for me to continue to be around and talk to him. And, I was supportive of my parents. So yeah, I think for him, that was the thing. I didn't change very much. Like
Yeah.
they say, you're going to go off the deep end when you leave and do all these things. All I wanted to do was go to school. I just had goals, so
So let me ask you, what kind of advice would you give to my listening audience?
I would say that for women, you need to learn to listen to your own intuition and trust yourself and trust that you're able to make your own choices. Because as Jehovah's Witnesses, especially as women, we are told really not to listen to our intuition. Don't lean on your own understanding. If you don't understand something and you can't find an answer, wait on Jehovah. You're supposed to trust all your brothers. It doesn't matter if you have a personal feeling, that's your brother. You have to be around him. And so I think that makes it seem like you're not supposed to follow your own heart, your own feelings, your own intuition, which is actually a protection. It's a form of protection for us. And I would say that is something that women, as they leave the organization, need to learn to start to trust themselves and believe that they listen to their inner voice. If you get a bad feeling about something and something's not for you, it's okay. Don't do it. If you feel that there is a different direction to go in, trust yourself, because we were not taught to trust ourselves. We were taught to follow the arrangement, do what the brothers tell us to do, squash down any doubts in yourself, and it puts you in a vulnerable position when you leave, because now you don't trust yourself. Am I making the right decision? This doesn't feel right to me, but can I trust myself to know what's right for me? So I would say listen to your intuition, develop that relationship with yourself that you can trust yourself to make correct decisions on your own without having to rely on prior teachings. That's the advice that I would give to women. Learn to trust yourself.
That's very good advice to give. I think that's just the start of leaving, too. People just don't know. A lot of people just don't know what they don't know.
Right. Especially if you were born in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another conversation, right? People who were born and raised in versus people who entered as an adult and then left, because people who entered as an adult, they had a whole past. They had a past personality. You know how they say you have to change, put on a new personality? That applies to people who had a previous personality, right? They had a whole lifestyle, friends, family that they were living. And then they became Jehovah's Witnesses and they changed. Well, then when they leave, they have a point of reference. They have old friends they can contact and say, hey, I'm back. Family members they can contact, things they used to do before they were Jehovah's Witnesses that they could go back to do again. But when you're born in, you don't have an old personality. You have no previous point of reference as to how to navigate in outside of the organization. And so that is a whole different experience and a unique experience to someone who went in as an adult and then left as an adult. And so sometimes it's two different conversations when people have a lot of fear. A lot of times the people who have a lot of fear are people who were born and raised in, because not only were they raised in this society, they were told that everything else was bad their whole life. Everybody's bad. Everything is bad. The world is ending. It's Satan's arrangement. So now you leave, and now you're navigating through this world that you were taught your whole life was bad.
Yeah.
That's a really hard place to be in for a lot of people. And it takes time to learn how to navigate that, to trust yourself without being able to, let me go look in a magazine and see what I should do, right? Because that's what they always told you to do before you make a decision. Well, let me go back and read this or research this. Okay, it says we shouldn't have these type of jobs, so I can't take that job. It was very simple to do that. But then when you leave, you don't have that point of reference. Like, who do I turn to now if I have a question? Should I take this job? Should I live here? Should I date this person? You don't have that fallback of, well, let me just look in the magazine or let me ask an elder what I should do.
Yeah, that happened a lot. And we would get people calling us all the time. And this one sister in my congregation would just say, where's JT? Can you do this? Can we do this? Can we do that? And that's all they ever did. They could never make decisions on their own. It was always looking for an elder to give them advice, to tell them what to do, to give them the green light that it was okay to do something.
Yeah. So when you leave, you have to learn to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people that comes naturally, but for other people, it's a struggle.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. We got a lot of good gems here, and just a whole lot of good stuff that people could use. But anyway, so I want to thank you so much, Crystalyn, for being on the program, and we look forward to talking again in upcoming episodes.
Thank you so much. It was great.
You're welcome. Before we wrap up today, if you're just now joining us in part 4, be sure to check out the first 3 episodes in this series. All of the links are in the description below, so you don't have to search for anything. Thank you for taking this journey with us. There's more to come on Hidden Struggles, and I'll see you in the next episode.